Canada has treated us very bad.
Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs.
Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying moments ago on X, President Trump's proposed tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days for his country. Trudeau wrote in part.
But more on something that might well happen, that if he does choose to go forward with tariffs that raise the cost of just about everything for American citizens, that on top of that, we're going to have a robust response to that.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced on X that the United States will pause its proposed tariffs on Canada for at least 30 days. This decision comes after intense negotiations and pressure from Washington, as President Donald Trump continues to leverage trade policies as a tool for achieving his broader political and security objectives. As we move forward, I'd like to ask you a quick favor to subscribe and like this video. It takes just a second and helps us so much.
We have to stop people from pouring in, and we have to stop fentanyl, and that includes China. Fentanyl has killed this year at least 200,000 people. It's pouring in from China through Mexico and Canada, and they've got to stop it. And if they don't stop it, the tariffs are going to get worse, a lot worse.
The proposed tariffs, initially set to be imposed on Canadian imports, were part of Trump's stance on border security and organized crime, particularly regarding the trafficking of fentanyl and other illicit activities. For weeks, tensions had been rising between the two neighboring nations, with Canada facing the prospect of significant economic strain if the tariffs were enacted.
In Washington, Trump spoke of his agreement Monday with Mexico to pause the tariffs for a month in exchange for concessions from Mexico City, meant to stop migration flows and the movement of illegal drugs across the southern border. Markets quickly made up some losses after his announcement. He also announced a similar pause with Canada later on Monday.
The pause provides temporary relief, but it comes at a price. Canada has agreed to a series of commitments to address U.S. concerns over border security and the flow of illegal substances into the country. Among the key measures, his government pledged to appoint a new fentanyl czar, officially classify cartels as terrorist organizations, and ramp up border surveillance to a 24/7 monitoring system. Additionally, a Canada-U.S. joint strike force will be launched to target money laundering operations and dismantle criminal networks between the two nations. While this agreement temporarily halts the economic pressure Canada was bracing for, it also raises questions about the long-term implications of Trudeau's concessions. Has Canada successfully negotiated a fair deal, or has it simply postponed an inevitable clash with the U.S.? To support these initiatives, Trudeau has also signed a new intelligence directive aimed at enhancing Canada's ability to track and combat organized crime. This directive will be backed by a $2 million investment, which, while a relatively small sum in the context of national security, represents a financial commitment to enforcing these new measures.
Announcing a temporary pause on the 25% tariffs on Mexico after coming to an agreement with President Claudia Sheinbaum.
In Mexico's case, Trump threatened to impose tariffs on imports unless the country took concrete steps to curb the flow of drugs and illegal border crossings. Rather than risking a trade war with the U.S., Mexico swiftly responded by deploying 10,000 soldiers to its southern border to crack down on trafficking and illegal migration. This decisive action was enough to satisfy Trump's demands, and as a result, he announced that Mexico's tariffs would be paused for at least a month. The mere threat of U.S. tariffs on Canada sent shockwaves through both economies, underscoring just how deeply intertwined their trade relationship is. With over $1 trillion in annual trade between the two nations, any disruption, especially one as significant as broad tariffs, would have major consequences. For Canada, the risk was particularly severe. As the smaller economy in the partnership, it relies heavily on the U.S. as a primary export market. Any additional costs imposed through tariffs would have made it significantly harder for Canadian businesses to compete, potentially leading to widespread financial strain across multiple industries. If the tariffs had been implemented, Canadian exporters would have been hit hardest. Industries such as manufacturing, agriculture, and energy, sectors that rely on seamless cross-border trade, would have immediately faced higher costs and reduced demand from American buyers. This would have led to job losses, production slowdowns, and a ripple effect throughout the Canadian economy. However, the impact wouldn't have been one-sided. American businesses and consumers would have felt the sting as well. Tariffs don't just hurt the exporting country, they also raise the cost of imported goods, which gets passed down to consumers. Many Canadian products, from raw materials to finished goods, are critical to American industries. Increased prices on essential imports would have made it more expensive for U.S. manufacturers to produce goods, leading to higher store prices and potentially slowing economic growth. Beyond just energizing his supporters, this move also strengthens Trump's broader political standing. He can now argue that his administration is making real progress in combating organized crime, fentanyl trafficking, and illegal border crossings, issues that are central to his platform. By securing Canada's commitment to increase surveillance, the formation of a joint task force, and the appointment of a fentanyl czar, he can claim that his pressure tactics directly led to stronger security measures. Whether these measures will be effective in practice is a separate question, but politically, the perception of success is often just as important as the reality. For Justin Trudeau, however, the outcome is more complicated. His decision to concede to U.S. demands may be seen as pragmatic diplomacy, an effort to prevent economic catastrophe, but it also risks being viewed as a sign of weakness.
I am announcing Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods. This will include immediate tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods as of Tuesday, followed by further tariffs on $125 billion worth of American products in 21 days' time to allow Canadian companies and supply chains.
In Canada, there will undoubtedly be debates over whether Trudeau stood firm or caved too quickly under pressure. His critics will argue that he allowed Trump to dictate terms, effectively surrendering to American demands rather than negotiating on an equal footing. His supporters, on the other hand, may frame it as a necessary step to protect Canadian jobs and businesses from economic harm. The standoff between the U.S. and Canada over tariffs isn't just a bilateral issue. It carries significant implications for America's allies around the world. Donald Trump's use of economic pressure as a bargaining tool has sent a clear message. No country is exempt from his hardline trade tactics, not even close allies like Canada. This approach creates a global ripple effect, as other nations take note of how the U.S. is willing to leverage its economic dominance to secure policy changes. Governments across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific will now be asking themselves the same question. If Trump is willing to use tariffs against Canada, what's stopping him from doing the same to us? A striking parallel can be drawn to China's economic retaliation against Australia in 2020. After Australia called for an independent investigation into the origins of COVID-19, Beijing responded with a wave of tariffs and trade restrictions on key Australian exports, including wine, barley, and lobsters. Australian businesses suffered significant losses, and the dispute took nearly 5 years to resolve. At the time, Australia chose not to bow to China's economic pressure, instead seeking new trade partners and weathering the financial strain. One of the biggest questions arising from this situation is whether Trump's strategy will extend to other U.S. allies. Australia, for example, enjoys a strong trade relationship with the U.S., but that doesn't necessarily mean it's immune to similar pressure. This scenario places U.S. allies in a difficult position. They essentially face two options: follow Mexico's lead and cooperate quickly to avoid economic punishment, or resist like Canada initially did and suffer financial consequences before ultimately being forced to concede. The 30-day pause on tariffs is not a permanent resolution, but rather a conditional reprieve. If Trump and his administration feel that Canada's efforts are insufficient, the threat of tariffs could return, potentially placing even greater economic pressure on Canadian businesses. The biggest question now is what happens after the 30-day pause. While Canada has taken immediate steps to address U.S. concerns, there is no guarantee that this will be enough to keep tariffs at bay indefinitely. If Trump remains unsatisfied, he could reintroduce the tariffs at any moment, putting Canada back in the same vulnerable position. What do you think? Let us know in the comments.